Welcome back. Well, Anthony Albanese is inked a new $1 billion defence deal with Germany, visiting Berlin en route to the NATO summit. It allows Australian-made vehicles to be sold to Germany. Some are saying great for the Australian industry. Not everyone's saying it's a wise move strategically, though. Joining me for more on this, Michael Shoebridge, Director of Strategic Analysis Australia. Thanks very much for your time, Analysis Australia, I should say. So it's a deal that boosts Germany's capabilities. We're still not hearing a lot, though, about Australia helping out Ukraine, and we're sending not exactly state-of-the-art equipment to them in our latest batch. How do you compare those two, the big, impressive $1 billion deal and then what we're giving to Ukraine?
Well, Tom, I just wonder how we can look ourselves in the mirror. You know, we're talking about $1 billion for Australian jobs, and we're talking about arming Germany with armoured vehicles so it can fight a war against Russia, which only makes sense if Russia conquers Ukraine. So what we should be doing right now is supporting Ukraine so that Germany doesn't have to fight a war against Ukraine. And as you say, we're giving them 1960s era stuff in the disposals bucket while we're building state-of-the-art stuff with Germany.
And sure, Germany's paying, but our initial pledges on what's happening, on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, seem to think we were elevating this and saying this is a really important thing for democracy around the world. So you're putting it in very basic terms that if we gave these to Ukraine instead, there's every chance Germany would never need them because the Russians wouldn't get past Ukraine.
Well, even not these vehicles. We've got things in sheds in Australia. Like in Canberra, we have weapons that will shoot down drones and missiles using machine gun rounds and cannon rounds. President Biden has just said he's giving Ukraine cluster munitions because the cupboard's bare of everything else. Well, our cupboards aren't bare, but we're not opening them up to help Ukraine fight this war.
So indeed, if we're concerned about the use of cluster munitions, and there's plenty of agreements around that they shouldn't be used, we could help alleviate that with more conventional rounds.
Absolutely. We could give them the systems that fire ammunition that is in oversupply in the world, machine gun rounds and cannon rounds. We're not doing that. But we have the capacity to do that right now.
What have you, pardon me, what have you made of the Australian government's explanation for not sending them, for not sending the Hawkeyes, which was around a braking issue? Apparently Ukraine said, hey, it's kind of life and death over here. If the brakes aren't quite operating as they should, we'll deal with it.
The Ukrainians have shown they can use all kinds of military systems in novel ways and solve a whole lot of engineering problems. We should let the Ukrainians solve this problem for us, and we should get out of their way. So if they say the vehicles would be useful and we have them, we should supply them.
Can you figure out what the thinking of the Australian government is, whether it's direct quotes or what you're hearing or a theory?
Well, you look at what the Prime Minister's interested in. He's interested in spending defence money for Australian jobs. I think that's a fundamental mistake. You don't get an vibrant economy out of defence spending. You get security out of defence spending. So I think that's the problem there. And I think there's a small-minded focus on the near neighbourhood. You know, let's look at Southeast Asia and pretend that the wider world doesn't matter.
We'll see, I suppose, if there are any more pledges from Australia or otherwise. That's what Ukraine's hoping. There's an offensive that, I don't think it's going terribly, but it's very slow, and they're hoping to get some impetus out of this.
Well, for those of us who are looking at what's happening in the war right now, President Biden's statement that there's a critical shortage of supplies is the thing that should get our attention.
Okay.
You know, a counteroffensive will go nowhere if they run out of supplies. So what do we have in our cupboard we can give? And we've got Bushmasters, we've got Hawkeyes, and we've got weapons that shoot drones and missiles down that use ammunition that the Ukrainians have.
Okay. The meeting also about a possible pathway to Ukraine becoming part of NATO. It won't happen before the conflict's over because that's sort of like effectively declaring war on Russia as the NATO declaring war on Russia, if you like. But is that likely to happen, that they say once this is all over, get through it? Easy to say, isn't it? I'm not meaning to be flippant. You will get membership, and then Sweden too could happen sooner than that, and suddenly Russia gets the last thing it wanted, being almost surrounded by NATO.
Well, I think putting Ukraine on a path to NATO membership makes sense because there's no way this war ends where Russia is just a peaceful, lovely neighbour of Europe and the border of Europe with Russia goes through Ukraine. So it makes absolute sense. And that's a deterrent signal to Russia beyond this current war. That makes sense. Sweden, I think, really is just being held a little bit hostage by Turkey for completely different reasons to anything to do with Ukraine. So that's an internal European deal that just has to happen.
Yeah, and that's one, I guess we had for years a sort of go slow on this sort of element, and that's what Sweden is hoping, that there's some urgency to this now, because look what happened. When you delayed, and even going back pre, the Crimea invasion, the thought was always like, oh, we'll get there, let's not rush it. And then look what happened with Russia and seizing on that.
Yeah, well, time is not our friend, and it's not the friend of anyone in Europe. So fast-tracking NATO's membership application for Finland has worked. The same needs to happen with Sweden.
Michael Shoebridge, appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.